Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you briefly about a review of ecological issues at wind farm public inquiries. I've had the pleasure, or perhaps that's not the right word, recently of the last few years of appearing at 4, soon to be 5 public inquiries dealing with issues relating to bats. And in a mad moment, I also took an opportunity to decide to have a look at how wildlife issues in generally were being dealt with at public inquiries and whether there were any lessons that could be learnt from that. So, first thing to do is to acknowledge David Stewart of David Stewart Associates, who helped tremendously in gathering up a lot of public inquiry decision letters and notices. So thank you for David for that. It was a mad moment when I agreed to do this. But between looking at last year's State of the Industry report from UK Renewables, from November 2009 to 2010, 45% of planning applications for onshore wind farms of less than 50 megawatts were refused by local planning authorities. This shows a fall, or last year that showed a fall in approval rates from the previous years of 83. And I understand from the meeting I attended in here on the National Planning Policy Framework, the latest report is showing 26% approval now of planning applications. Of those applications which went to appeal, again 45% were refused. And so we set about reviewing planning inspectors' reports from across the UK. I said the last 10 years, it felt like the last 10 years. It was actually probably the last 8 to 6 years. 81% of those I looked at made some reference to ecology matters, either as a main or as an other issue at inquiry, or as a minor requirement, which was referred to in terms of proposed conditions. So the aims of the review were to look at what percentage of public inquiries were referring to ecology as an issue, what the main ecological issues were of concern, the prominence of those issues in inspectors' reports, to try and identify cases where ecology was seen as a critical issue, and identify how often statutory bodies, as opposed to third parties and pressure groups, raised ecological objections. I also wanted to see whether there was any regional themes or commonalities arising from the review, and I also wanted to determine if survey guidance has had a bearing on the frequency of issues being raised, and lastly, what lessons can be learned and what may the future bring. Method sounds very grand. Essentially, we started off by doing word searches through 85 reports, and I started recording some basic information from those. One was location in the sense of in the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, the date of the inquiry decisions, the number of turbines at each inquiry, name of the inspector, how the report categorised the issues, whether it was seen as a main issue or just another issue or a minor issue, how the issue was raised at the inquiry. Was it part of the original LPA objection, or was it an issue that was picked up by an inspector as a result of third-party representations? I also looked at whether the inspector granted or dismissed the appeal, the weight given by the inspector to ecological issues, and where the inspector did place weight on ecological matters. I tried to get to the bottom of what were the particular reasons for that weight. So, simply broke it down into bats, birds, or birds, bats, and other wildlife issues. And that's how I'm going to quickly present those results. Of the 47 reports that made reference to birds, 23 from England and 24 from Scotland, so it was a nice even split. I had no studies from Wales or Northern Ireland, I'm afraid. The earliest report was back in June 2006, and the latest was actually August 2010. 22 reports, approximately 47%, covered inquiries where birds were the main issue. And 25 reports, just over 50%, covered inquiries where birds were a secondary or viewed as another issue by the inspector. 20 appeals, just over 42% were dismissed, and 27, just over 57%, were allowed. Of those dismissed, 3 reports, 6.3%, concluded that issues relating to birds was a reason for refusal of the application. And those 3 cases, one was for an application for 234 turbines, and another was for an application of a single turbine. The larger one being up in northwest Scotland, and the single turbine being in East Anglia. The other one was for an application for 5 turbines, and the range of reasons which were given for those refusals. In terms of the very large scheme, it was fundamentally an impact on European protected sites, and that the impact was considered unacceptable. In relation to the single turbine scheme, it was a very interesting decision, because actually there was not an issue. Natural England hadn't objected. In fact, Natural England suggested conditions could be applied to achieve the objective of further survey work, and they were quite content. And in fact, further survey work was done prior to the inquiry starting and was presented at the inquiry. And yet the inspector still refused it on grounds of insufficient survey information. And the reason the inspector refused it was because whilst the appellant had done the survey work that was required of them, they hadn't made any assessment of what that survey results actually meant. Did it mean there was an impact or not? No information was given to the inspector. Natural England, as a consultee, had also not looked at the survey results and made a comment as to whether it meant anything significant or not. So we had a strange case of all the survey work being requested having been done, but no assessment being made, and as a consequence, the inspector, who was clearly irritated by this, said, well, I'm going to refuse it, because until I know what the impact is, I have no certainty, and therefore it's contrary to PPS 9, threw it out. The other case, which was for a 5-turbine scheme, was in central England, and again, the issue here was insufficient information, insufficient survey, in particular in relation to birds. And the inspector actually stated that, to my mind, some of the survey work fell well short of best practice. And you can look at the detail of it. I'm quite happy to talk about the detail of it later on, but they looked at merlin, peregrine, nightjar, goshawk and lapwing, and on all levels the survey work just fell short, well, significantly fell short of the required survey guidance, and on that basis the inspector felt that she didn't have sufficient information, felt there was a risk of impacts, and therefore threw it out.